Okay, hello everyone. My name is Erin. I am in the CNS Career Center. I'm one of the assistant directors, and I'm really happy to be here to talk to you all about interviewing. So I want this to be as interactive as possible, so please feel free to either send a message in the chat to me or to everyone, or even just unmute yourself and ask questions. I want to make sure you're getting as much out of this as possible, so it's the most helpful it can be. So just a quick housekeeping. This won't go far. There we go. A lot of what I'm showing you today and even more is on our website. So we have recently redone our website. We have a lot of really great career help and resources there. So if you just go to cns.umass.edu/careers, there is a whole section specifically on interviewing and job offers. And of course, you are always welcome to make an appointment with one of us as the career advisors on campus, or even just come in and talk briefly with one of the students who are career peer advising on drop-ins from 10 to 5 every day. So as we go along, start thinking what your questions are about interviewing. So feel free to put them in the chat, ask them out loud, make sure that you're getting out of this exactly what you can get. Have any of you been on interviews in the past? Yes. So has anyone had an in-person interview, or have they all been virtual lately? Is anything? Because that's a big difference. Has anyone had an in-person interview since COVID hit? Okay, well, I don't think so. I will say they're starting to come back. So that's one of the things we're going to talk about too. Some of the differences between in-person and virtual interviews, because they are, there are some different professional skills as you go through. So when you are preparing for an interview, the first thing you want to know is getting an interview with a prospective employer, or is for an internship or research, is an accomplishment in itself. So by getting an interview, they are saying you fulfilled their minimum qualifications. We think you could potentially be a good candidate, and we want to see if you're going to fit in with this organization. So keep that in mind, that hopefully that is a good confidence boost for you, because that should be, right? So getting that interview alone is a good accomplishment to be proud of yourself. That again says you are one of the few that they've chosen for an interview. So how are you going to prepare for that interview? This is your chance to make a personal connection with the employer and show them why you'd be perfect for the job. The interview getting the interview shows that your resume or your application fulfills those minimums. Now you have to show them how you are the perfect candidate for this job. So you have to learn how to prepare, to interview well, present yourself, make sure that you're articulate and can answer their questions, and that you really have an understanding of what this job entails too. So how do you do that? First thing you're going to do is research and prepare. So there are 4 different things you want to research when you are preparing for an interview. First thing you want to do is learn about the organization. You need to learn as much as possible about potential employers so that you can make sure that it is a good match for you. So learn about their mission, learn about their culture, their products or their services, go through their website. But don't just go through their website, go through their events section, Google the company and see what current news is happening, if they're, what kind of place is it to work. Do keep in mind that if you go on something like some of those websites that have ratings on jobs, sometimes, kind of like Yelp, you can rate jobs that you work on. Most of the time you have to take that with a little bit of a grain of salt, because a lot of people aren't going to put reviews of employers on unless it's bad. Very rarely are they going to put some really good ones on there. So you definitely want to be aware of things and do your research, but also, again, keep in mind that some of those ratings aren't always as equal as they could be. So, but by researching that organization, it will let you make clear connections between your skills and their needs when you're preparing for the interview. Second thing you want to prepare for is the position itself. So you want to make sure that read through that job description, figure out exactly what the job entails, and make sure it's something you still want to do. Just because you are offered an interview doesn't mean you have to take that interview. Most of the time you want it, right? You wouldn't apply if it's not a good fit for you. But make sure you're going into this interview with an idea of what the job entails, and that it interests you. And if you don't know exactly what it entails, this interview is your chance to ask all those questions to find out if it's the right place for you. You also want to look at the industry. So what is the growth, especially as you're looking for full-time positions later, because you want to make sure what's the growth potential, what's the average salary, what's the work environment, those expectations. Like, are you jumping into a work environment where you're expected to work 70 hours a week? That might be okay for you. That might be something that you see as a light at the end of the tunnel, right? Something you're willing to do for a year or two, put in that work. It may not be feasible based on your personal situation, your work, what you want to do in your life. So make sure you're looking at the job and what that environment, that industry, that growth is. There are brand new careers and companies happening all the time. As recently as a few decades ago, there was no data science, there was no biomechanics, a lot of fields are constantly growing. There are a lot of new industries, which means a lot of opportunities, but make sure you know what you're getting into there. And the last thing you want to research is yourself. So what do you want to get out of this job? Is this a good location? Are you looking for a certain salary to support yourself? We're all looking to support ourselves, but is there a certain salary you need? Is there, what are the fringe benefits? And when I say fringe benefits, that means work-life balance, vacation time or personal time, support for grad school in some cases. You'll need to make sure you're balancing your own needs and career satisfaction. It's not always good. It's not always easy to do, right? So make sure you have a good idea of what you're looking for in a job. Or an internship, whatever it may be, your research. So once you've done all this research to help prepare for that interview, now you have to help the recruiters figure out that you're the best person for them to hire. When you go in with this knowledge of the industry, the company, and the position, one, you'll feel a lot more confident because you'll know you can answer some of their questions, but two, you'll be better prepared to answer the questions they have effectively and knowledgeably. So what does an interview look like? There are a couple different types of interviews that you could have. Most of the time, once you submit your resume, you will get called for a first round interview. These are typically short, and keep in mind there are exceptions to everything, but this is how they start out. Sometimes the first one is really just a screening interview. So it's someone from their human resources or HR department calling just to really go over a couple things in your resume to make sure you fulfill their qualifications and to make sure you're interested before they go into the next step. Most of the time, these are done by phone or a quick Zoom call. Occasionally, these first round interviews will be in person, but that's pretty rare. Most of the time, they will do that, especially now with COVID, almost everything. Sometimes final interviews are virtual too. Your second round of an interview still can be short. It can be, usually these are an hour, maybe an hour and a half. Sometimes though, they can be a full day visit. And it depends on the industry and the job, but these are the big interviews. So these usually involve meeting more than one person. So you'll meet with maybe your PI if you're looking for a research position, or who your supervisor would be. You will meet with someone in human resources who will probably talk about the benefits and the salary and that type of work. But this is really this is kind of the crux of your interview. So this is really what you're going to prepare for these skills. Another kind of interview that you may hear is called a panel interview. And that means it's literally what it sounds like. You are talking to multiple recruiters at once. And this can happen sometimes. They're also sometimes called, where if you literally think about it as you're sitting across the table from 3 or 4 other people who are all interviewing you and asking questions. They can sometimes feel really intimidating, but they're not meant to be. They don't mean to intimidate you. They are just there because they feel like it's more time effective to have you meet with multiple people at once and get an answer about your questions. Has anyone had a panel interview? They aren't very common for undergraduate students. Usually these are kind of more higher level, but it can happen. So those are pretty rare, but just be aware that you may have those. Generally, when you are preparing for an interview, they will let you know what to expect. So they will tell you who you're meeting with and when. If they don't give you that information though, that is a great thing to ask ahead of time. So when they call to schedule your interview and say we'd like to meet with you at 10 a.m. on Thursday, you can say, that's fantastic. Can you let me know how long to set aside for the interview time? So I make sure, don't say how much I have to be there. You want to always keep it positive. So how much time should I set aside? I'm really excited for this interview. And can you tell me who I'll be meeting with? That way you can do some some preparation. It also allows you, if they give you the names of the people you're interviewing with, you can also search those people. So like, for example, if you're interviewing with a certain faculty member, for example, for research, you look at their lab, you look at what they're teaching, at their research interests. If you are applying to an internship at a biotech company in Boston or Springfield, you would do the same thing. You can look them up in the company, you can look them up on LinkedIn. It's a great idea to have an understanding of their background and experience so you can try and make connections with yourself. A couple different kinds of interview situations is a group interview. These also are not very common, but they do happen. And this literally means you and 3 or 4 other people applying for the same job are being interviewed as a group. So this is, again, is kind of rare, but these are occasionally they'll do these, like if you're applying to med school. I've heard of some med school situations doing this, where they may not even call it an interview, but it might be a group discussion. And really they're actually evaluating there to see how you interact with other people, see what your personality type is. Are you a natural leader? Are you a follower? Are you an interrupter? Because that's not good. You want to, it's hard to have that balance sometimes of being a leader, but also not interrupting and taking charge of that whole situation. You want to make sure you're letting people in. Obviously, the most common type of interview the last couple years, unfortunately, is a Zoom or video interview. So this can have some benefits. It does solve distance issues. Whereas until 2 years ago, if you had an interview in Boston, you had to figure out how to get yourself there. You had to miss classes, you had to get a ride out there or borrow a car or take the Peter Pan bus out there. And those are those benefits. It saves time. But it is also hard sometimes to get a real feel for a person over a camera. So that's something I'm going to talk a little bit later about, some techniques and strategies you can do for virtual interviews. If it's a Zoom or video interview, make sure you're testing everything early, making sure you have a quiet, distraction-free environment. Make sure your door is shut, put a note outside your door that you have an interview in process so that your roommates don't come knocking in. Just be prepared for any distractions. And then sometimes if you're applying for more of a consulting type role, especially, and this can even be with biotech or scientific consulting, they may ask you to do a case study. These are generally more business related, but they do happen in STEM fields. So this is something you might have to do later. In this case, they really do give you a situation or a scenario and ask you how you would deal with this. So they're looking to see how you analyze data, your creative thinking, your problem solving. We have resources for all of these on our website too. So if you find out you have a case study interview, let us know. Send one of us in the Career Center. All of our emails are on the website. Send us an email, stop up in our office, and we can give you some things like case study guides. Again, these are not as common in the STEM fields, but if you are going to consulting too, it can happen. Any questions on the different types of interview situations and scenarios? Okay. So now let's talk about the layout of an interview and what that looks like. So there are 3 different basic steps, like 3 different parts of an interview. The first part is really where they're getting to know you. So this is where they may say, tell me about yourself. They're going to start asking you things. They really want to know who you are and what is interesting you about this position. The middle part is where they want to understand you and how you would fit into this position. So this is, again, where they're going to go a little more in depth with those questions, like, tell me about a project you've done well. Tell me why, tell me, what a success that you've done, a challenge you have, something, lots of questions. We have a lot of sample questions too, also on our website, or that I can share. But they really want it, this is going to be how they understand you and how you fit into this position. And then that last part of this is understanding this position as it's related to you. And this is your chance to ask questions. This is your chance to say, how does this position fit into me? And this is a chance to get your questions all answered. So for that first part, one of the first things they are probably going to ask you is, tell me about yourself. And they have your resume in front of you, so they don't need you to repeat everything on your resume or your transcript, but they want to know, think of, has anyone heard of this phrase, elevator pitch? No? And I think a couple have. So an elevator pitch is the idea, it came out of like the business world, where the whole idea is, let's say you have a dream job you really want to get, and you got onto an elevator on the first floor, and getting in the elevator after you is the hiring manager or the head of the company. And you realize you have 4 floors, so you get up to the top floor of the elevator or top floor of the building to introduce yourself and convince them to interview you. So your elevator pitch is literally a 1 to 2 minute pitch where you say, this is who I am. It is not a whole long speech. It's not, again, your whole story that's on your resume. It's just in your introduction. So think about what are 2 or 3 important things that they want to hear from you. So when you say, tell me about yourself, they'll say, you can say, hi, I'm Erin. I'm a junior biochemistry and molecular biology major at UMass Amherst. I'm very interested in the biotech industry. I'm currently doing lab research on XYZ, and I'm very excited to be here today because I think I can make a good contribution to this internship program based on my skills. So just start thinking about how you'd answer that question. 99% of interviews start out with that question. It's not meant to be a trick question. It really is just a chance for you to introduce yourself and for them to get to know you. Figure out what they want to hear. You don't want to just tell them what they want to hear, but you want to make sure you're answering the questions about yourself, figuring out what they care about and why are they here too? What do they see in you that they think would make you a good candidate? So make sure you know yourself. This program, whatever program you're applying to, can only give you so much. So think about what you want to get out of it as well and how you want them to perceive you. All right, another question they're probably going to ask you to start out is, why do you want to do this job and why do you want to do it here, right? They want to know about you and how you fit into this organization, but they also want to know why you want to be here. And they don't want to hear that you just want to get a job. We all know you want a job and need a job. We all need jobs, but they want to know why you want this one. Why is this a good fit for you? This is your chance to show that motivation and excitement. The fact that you got an interview shows that you're qualified for the position, and that is what's important. You do not have to be the most qualified candidate of a position if you can show that you're the most motivated, the most interested, and the person who's willing to work the hardest at the job, right? So they would much rather have someone who's excited and motivated to do that job and has really done their research and knows what that job entails than someone who may have, you know, incredible qualifications and 4 other internships and 2 research labs and a 4.0 and just basically done everything in the world, but they're just like, yeah, no, this would be fine. This would be good for me. If you can say, I'm so passionate about healthcare or research or this or whatever, that's why they want to, that's what really is going to make the difference. And you also have to let them know you want to do it there. You can be a lab tech anywhere, right? I mean, in other places, but what is it special about their company? And this is where doing that research about the company can really come into play, because you can say, you know, I've talked to alums, if you've talked to alums, or I've talked to people who work here and I really like the work-life balance you have, or I really like your focus on teaching so that I know that I'll be trained really well every time I have a new step here, or I really like the mentoring opportunities that you offer. So find out what does make that company special and tell them that. They want to hear that you've done your work, but also that you really appreciate the work they've done to make it a good company. So once you start out and once they kind of do some introductory questions, then they're going to get into the meat of it. So there are 2 big types of interviews: behavioral interviews and situational interviews. And you don't have to remember that exactly what those 2 things are. But the whole idea is that for a behavioral interview is they're going to ask you about something in your past, because their whole idea is the way you behave in the past is going to predict how you'll behave in the future. And that's not meant to be a bad thing. It can be, tell me about a time when. That's usually how those start. So tell me about a time where you were successful in a project, or tell me about a time when something didn't go well, or tell me about a time where you showed good leadership or good teamwork. So there are lots of different things they can ask you, but the important part, and that's what we call behavioral interviews. And the way to answer behavioral interview way, there's a trick called the STAR method. And this, if you think of it this way, this really helps to make your answers kind of concise and a really clear answer, because it's really easy. I don't know about you guys, but it's really, you folks, it's really easy for me to start babbling if I'm not prepared. So if I start answering that question about a successful project, I can say, well, I did this and this and this and this and this. Oh, and then I did this and then I did that. But if you think of this STAR method, this really helps you create an easy to follow story. So first of all, the S in STAR stands for situation. So if they ask you a question, think about introducing the situation. So you can say, if they say, tell me about a time where you worked well on a project. You can say, okay, well, in my junior year writing class, I had to write a paper about the theory of, I'm making something up. So it set the context. So you had the responsibility to write this paper, and I was in a group project I was in a group project. And then think of the T for the task. So these are literally your responsibility or your role in the situation and what your goal was. So you can say, in this group project, I was part of a group of 4 people, and my job was to come up with the lab protocols, right? So it doesn't have to be super long, but just really set that stage and 1 or 2 points to illustrate that task. So what was your role? And then the A in the STAR is the action. So explain that action that you took. So I decided to set up these lab protocols. I followed through. I did this follow through. I met with my 3 team members regularly to set this up. Really just indicate and discuss some of those most impactful things that you did. So what were those actions that you did? Maybe just think of it in your head as like bullet points that you did. And then R really is that result. So what happened? How did you, but also not just what you did. So we completed our group project. That's the result. But then also think about it as how this is going to showcase your skills and what you've done well, how you improved something. So we completed the project. I was very proud of the fact that we received an A, and the PI specifically suggested that the lab protocols were great. And I was very proud of how we worked as a team, and how my leadership skills helped with the whole project as a whole. So by talking about your own personal successes and really what resulted that added value or went well, that's where this method can happen. So we call this the STAR. You don't have to use it for everything, but it's really helpful when you're telling those stories or talking about the stories and the situations that you're in. Situation, task, action, and result. So let's think of an example here. And I'm going to ask you guys to do some jumping in here for a little bit. So let's say, for an example, an interviewer is going through a resume, and they notice that maybe your current GPA is a 3.5, but they have your transcript and they say, your freshman year or earlier on, you had a semester you had a 2.2. So one of the questions they may ask is, can you explain why your GPA isn't higher? So this is where you have the chance to kind of lay that out. So if someone asks that, what is something that you could say for the situation? Does anyone want to jump in? Yes.
You can say like it was a transitional time period, kind of from going from high school to a college setting. So that might have been like hard for you.
Absolutely. You actually took the words out of my PowerPoint. Yes, I entered my sophomore year with a low GPA. Oh, this was, sorry, I said it differently as I explained it to you all. I'd always done well, but I didn't handle that transition well as a freshman. So that's exactly right. So that would be the situation, right? So then they wanted to, but you did get it higher, right? So then what was the tasks that you did? So that next part, what you could say is, oh, it didn't go that way. Sorry, let's sit there. I knew that if I wanted to succeed, I had to develop better study habits and manage my time better. So then that's kind of talk about what you did, right? That was the task that you did in order to get your GPA higher. So what could an action be that you did? Does anyone have an idea of what that would be? Who wants to take that? Obviously, this is fictional, so sure. But what are some actions you could have done to get your grades up and develop better study habits? Right? What about making a calendar or itemizing things, right? So that action could have been, I created a calendar, I marked the due dates, I set aside time to study, right? Because your task was to create better study habits. So I added more time for exam weeks. I decided to stick with this plan until after first semester grades came, so I gave it a chance to work, right? So that would be the action to increase your grades. And then what would those result be? My grades improved. I used this system and I've earned a 3.5 ever since while still being involved on campus, and my GPA has been strong ever since. So this is your chance to talk about those accomplishments. So when you phrase the story this way, right, it really helps them to see, and you don't want to use the words and say, okay, the situation, you don't want to say, okay, I'm gonna use the STAR method. But this is a good thing to practice because you really want to create your own success stories. Think of when you are preparing for this resume, or for this in an interview, one of the most helpful things that you can do for yourself is to think of a couple of these stories that might possibly happen. So we call these success stories. So what are some of the things that this position requires? Does this require, look at the job description. Does it require attention to detail? So they may ask you, can you describe a time where you showed really good attention to detail? Does it require the ability to work in a lab research team? They may say, tell me about a time you worked well as a team. So think of 3 or 4 stories. You're never going to guess every question I'm going to ask. But if you can think of 3 or 4 stories that answer that and follow that, sometimes those stories can answer 3 or 4 of the same question, or 3 or 4 different questions. So if it was a group project you did really well on in your organic chemistry lab, that could answer working as a team, lab research skills, a challenging project. So having a couple of success stories that you can talk out and practice tying those together using the STAR method, the situation, task, action, result, can be really helpful going forward. So here is another one that is very common. Tell me about a project that you're proud of, right? So that is something that's a very common question because especially with COVID, they also know that internship and research opportunities have been limited for students. There are some obviously, and the fact that you're all in this program has shown that you're getting that research experience, but it is still something they are really big on. Tell us what your academic projects are. We know that you haven't had the opportunity to get as many internships and research as in pre-COVID typical years. So tell us about your academics. Tell us what you've learned that you're ready to apply. So to the real world or to the outside of academic world. So think about this. We're not going to do this right now just for the interest of time, but I'd love for you to think about this and have an answer for an interview of a project that you're proud of. And think about it with that STAR method. What was the situation? What was the task, the action, and that result? Okay. Any questions on that, or anyone want to mention anything about that? Okay. That last third part of the interview that I mentioned, the start, the middle, and the end of the interview is going to be your chance to really evaluate if this is a position you're interested in. So they will usually end with, do you have any questions for us? And yes, you should always have questions for them. Even if you've had all of your questions answered, think of something else. By having questions for them, that's your chance for them to see that you're really interested and you want to make sure that it's a good fit for you. So prepare some smart questions for your interviewers. Interviews are a two-way street. They expect you to ask questions, and they want to know that you're thinking seriously about what it would be like to work there, right? So this is your chance to make sure its position is a good fit for you. Here are a couple sample questions you could ask your interviewers, and we also have a lot more. This career development handbook, I'm actually holding it, I don't know if you can see it. It's also on our website. I can send the link out there, but on page 51 of our handbook, which is again, you can come up to our Career Center and get a free copy of these, or you can also just look at it on the website. But these are some sample questions that we have. Can you explain some of the day-to-day responsibilities this job or this internship entails? So, what's a typical day look like? What are you going to be doing? Are you going to be sitting at a desk all day? Will it be doing bench lab research? Will you be meeting with people, or will it be something that you're literally in front of a computer by yourself all day? These are important things when whether it's an internship or full-time job, you want to make sure it's the environment you want to be in. Can you tell me about the team I'd be working with? How would you describe the characteristics of someone who'd succeed in this role? These are all really important things to think about Again, it's a two-way street. You want this, you need to want this job just as much as they want you to, right? If I were in this position, how would my performance be measured and how often? So it's really hard to go into a job and not know what your expectations are, how you're going to be reviewed, how you're going to get feedback and mentoring. So this is a question employers actually really like to hear because they want to know you care about this and you want to care to make sure you're doing it really well. And then you want to ask them what the follow-ups are. So what's the next steps in this process? Liz also lets them know you're interested and excited to move forward. So you can end your interview by saying, I'm really excited. I appreciate your time for this interview. So what's the next step? What's your time frame or what are the next steps? And they will let you know. This is also really important because there are, I've heard of people who have interviews and within a half hour, they have a phone call that they want to come back for a second interview or they want to offer a job. I've also had people who recruiters do interviews and then they go on vacation for a week or two and don't call anyone back for 2 weeks. And if you don't know that going in, if they forget they should tell you that, but if they forget to say, we're not going to be calling for the next, we have 2 more interviews, we'll call you back in 2 or 3 weeks and let you know, at least you understand then versus feeling anxious or unconfident or that you didn't get the job too. So it's always good to have an idea of that time frame. And tell us of your opportunity, what they didn't ask about you, or what they didn't ask you about that you want to know. So if they didn't, if you didn't, sorry, I phrased that wrong on the slide, actually, it doesn't look right, but it's your chance, ask them any questions that you didn't get answered, but also if there's something important about you that you think would be helpful for you in that job, this is your chance to bring it up. So you could say, I didn't get a chance to mention it, but I'm actually working on a really exciting project with a faculty member at UMass doing ABC. Or, I'm a very hard worker. I understand that I may not, because especially if they ask you about something and you don't have that expertise, like say they ask you for a certain lab skill or certain qualification that you don't have, you can say, I understand that I don't know how to write in Python, but I'm a really quick learner, and the way I have been able to succeed at UMass shows me that I'm confident I would not have any issues with this position, right? So that's your chance to bring up anything important or any successes and things that are good about you that you haven't brought up. The tricky one sometimes to bring up is salary. And this can be something that it's, if obviously we all need to support ourselves. So salary is going to be important. You can usually they will ask you by the time you're in an in-person interview what your salary requirements are. It's usually safer to just give a range because that gives you a little bit more negotiating room. There are some sample like scripts or things you can use on our website under the job offers page about how to negotiate. But really the trick is you don't want to be the one, if possible, to give the first number. You don't want to ask salary during a first round interview. That's usually just near the final. You can ask the range. That's totally acceptable. And they will often ask you your range. So there are some websites like salary.com and glassdoor.com, and these are also on our website, that will give you salary ranges if you plug in a city and state and the title of the job, and that can be helpful to see too. You can also come in and talk to us and we can work with you one-on-one about that too in specific situations. But the key part is you really don't want to say, what's the exact salary? Ask them that. It's kind of this weird tiptoe thing around a little bit to an extent, but generally it's better to wait and see what they offer. And if they try to pin you down, you can say, I'd really like to see what the whole compensation package is if possible, but you may be expected to give a range. Okay. Any questions on that? That's that last part of the interview. All right, so I'm now going to take a few minutes and go over some tips and tricks for interviews, because we know that you can get through that part, but there's still a lot of prep and there's still things you need to do for the interview. So how do you prepare for an interview? There's a couple different ways to prepare. So we already talked about the technical prep, right? So extensively research the industry, that company, and be prepared to talk about why you're a good fit. So why you think you'd be a good candidate for this job. And then, as I mentioned before, have 3 to 4 questions that you can ask that recruiter. If you are meeting with multiple people in the same company too, it's okay to ask those questions, the same questions to different people. It still shows you're interested and they may have different answers too for those. So professional preparation then too, ensure you have professional attire. I'm going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. Make sure you're clean, dressed professionally, double check the time and the location of the interview. If they say it's a Zoom interview, make sure the day before you have that Zoom link ready to go, because you don't want to be shuffling around trying to find out where something is. If you're taking the bus or a taxi, make sure you know how to get there ahead of time. If it is an in-person interview, bring copies of your resume. So even though they will have your resume because they obviously invited you for an interview, if other people are there, if they forget to print it, it's always helpful to have some copies of your resume and just have a pen and pad of paper so that you can write down notes for yourself if you need to. And then some psychological prep is really important too. Make sure you're in a good headspace for this. Get some fresh air, take some deep breaths, have a good breakfast, allow time for traffic, parking, bus, everything. You don't want to walk in there completely stressed and sweating and already frazzled. You want to go in calm and collected and confident. Make sure you arrive 15 minutes early. You don't necessarily have to go inside. You can sit outside the office, right? You can walk around the block. Just make sure you know where you are again, so you're not running ragged to get there. And make sure you have your computer on, make sure your computer is plugged in, make sure your Wi-Fi is working. You don't want to need to log in 15 minutes early, but you want to log in a few minutes early, maybe like 3 to 5 minutes early if it's an interview online. In addition, there are things that people notice that you'll want to get prepared for. So these are some things to keep in mind that they do notice. Your appearance. So make sure you are professional. We're going to talk about that in a little bit later too. Make sure you look professional, that you look like you put some effort into your appearance. Keep in mind, you want them to focus on you. You don't want them to focus on the background behind you. So if you have some posters or pictures, if you have really flashy jewelry or really bright clothing, sometimes that can be distracting. You want them to focus on you and what you're saying, not the background. Nonverbal communication is also really important. There's a saying that it only takes 7 seconds to make a first impression. So our nonverbal behaviors communicate just as much as our words, and they're really assessed carefully by interviewers. So for example, eye contact. It's really important to keep, look them in the eyes, smile, maintain good eye contact. It's okay to look down or around as you're thinking if you need to do that, but try to look them in the eye as much as possible in a friendly manner. If you have a video interview, this is kind of a strange, it feels unnatural. Look up at your camera button, not necessarily at this person on the screen, because it'll look like you're looking down a little bit. One trick that I sometimes use or tell students to use is I put a you can't see this here with the blurring, put a Post-it note next to your camera and say, look here. That'll remind you to look up at the camera as you're doing that. Make sure you have proper posture. Don't slouch, don't lean down in your chair, but you also don't want to look super nervous and straight. Just look, I know there's a lot of stuff here, but do your best. If you're too rigid, it'll look like you're really nervous. So try and be comfortable, keep your shoulders up and back. Watch your hand movements. When I get nervous, I talk with my hands like this. So whenever I've interviewed in the past for positions, whether it's on a video screen or in person, I always make sure I have a pen to hold. So I hold a pen. It's a little trick I do, right? Just to make sure that way by holding that pen, I don't have my hands going like this. That's just what I do. So think about it. And this is why sometimes practicing with a friend or roommate or classmate or family member can be really good, because they will tell you, oh, do you know you say all the time? Or do you know that you use your hands or you look all around? Having someone who cares about you give you some interview feedback may feel really weird, but it's also really effective because it'll tell you something before an interviewer notices it too. So those are the hand gestures, hand body movement. Attitude's also really important. Your attitude tells a lot to the employer. So your attitude should really reflect someone who's optimistic, self-confident, who really enjoys learning and challenges. If you're generally kind of a negative, pessimistic person, it'll be reflected in that interview, and that may not be, the type of person they want to join. I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this right, as part of a team environment, because I want someone who's going to be a team player. So try not to, and obviously, we all have bad days, that is totally fine. But when they ask you questions about like a previous position or a project or something, try not to concentrate on the negative aspects of things as much as possible. If you've had a bad day or a bad morning, try not to let that be known, right? Just again, no one's perfect. You don't have to hide everything, but gear yourself up, say, okay, I'm gonna be positive for the next 30 minutes. I'm gonna really show them the best side of me that's possible. So those are just important things to do there too. Make sure you're watching your tone of voice, your sound level. Again, when I'm nervous, I talk really, really fast. So I have to make sure that I am talking slowly and carefully if I'm in a situation like that. I mentioned in your head, make your time 10 to 15 minutes early. If you're super early, hang out in your car or outside, take a walk, review your resume, make sure you have your materials understood. If you're super late, call them, apologize, try to reschedule if it's an emergency or something's up. But make sure you reach out to them as soon as possible and let them know if something's happening. Also really important to greet and be friendly to everyone there. So whether that's an administrative assistant, a recruiter, a hiring manager, the interviewers, any other candidates that may be waiting in the office before or after, companies want a team player. They want someone who's there to work well with others. And you never know. I have been on search committees in the past where administrative assistants have been asked how that works, or other students who walk someone to an interview. Anyone who's had any interaction with you in that interview day may be asked what kind of impression you left on them. So you want to make sure you are friendly and open and welcoming to everyone. Any questions on that? There? No. Okay. So then what's your basic interview strategy? Make sure you're listening. This is something that can be, especially if you are someone who's nervous and is constantly thinking of the next question. Don't try to guess the interviewer's next question, or you'll only be listening, or it's easy to miss like the first part of a two-part question, right? Or the second part of a two-part question. Relax, fully listen before you're answering their question. Repeat the question silently to yourself if you need to, but make sure you have a good understanding of what they're asking for. If you relax and you listen well during that interview, you can also really think about additional questions to the ones you've already prepared for the interview too, because you'll know what's important to them. You'll know what they're asking, and it gives you a chance to follow up later with things too. And like I mentioned earlier, most organizations are looking for someone with a good team spirit. So be clear, be concise, be confident. Talk about being a team player, talk about, how you are excited to work as part of a team there too. When you are practicing before interviews too, practice for your confidence in your tone, answer the question being asked. If you feel like you're getting lost in your answer and you're, kind of babbling or you're mumbling or you're not really getting to it, stop yourself, regroup. It is absolutely fine to say, actually, can I start over? This is a good question. I want to make sure I'm getting it right. So they would rather you did that and then answered it in a way that really showcases your skills and what you've learned than if you just kind of bumble it and just move on to the next one, right? So it is absolutely okay to say, I'm not sure, let me think about that. And that kind of is a good segue into what if you don't know the answer. So ask them for clarification. If you don't know what they're asking, you can say, I'm not sure I'm clear. Can you rephrase that? Or what exactly are you asking for? Talk through your answers. Be honest. If you don't know something, tell them that. Say, I don't know, but I'd be happy to, but I think I'm a good learner. I don't know how to do that, but I'm a quick learner. I've done really well in my biology classes and I have confidence in this. They know you're college students. They don't expect you to be experts. They want to know you're willing and eager to learn. And that's what's going to be the most important thing. So as far as I mentioned earlier about projecting a professional image, and dressing for an interview is very important. So our rule of thumb is be dressed equal to the best dressed person in the room. And that is going to mean something different in many offices. So in some industries, a suit is typical. If you are going to a lab, they may all be jeans and sweatshirts and lab coats, but you still want to be one step up above that most likely. So your culture, your religion, your gender identity could influence your choice of business attire, and that's fine. We encourage that. you want to incorporate those elements into your business wardrobe. So you want to make sure, most importantly, that you are comfortable and show who you are rather than hide it. So many students, if you don't, because most people don't have suits sitting around unless you've been in a wedding recently. So it is absolutely fine. Purchase from discount stores, thrift stores. I know that there's a Goodwill and a Salvation Army, but one in Amherst, one in Hadley, the Target, the JCPenney. JCPenney every semester has a day where they have 20 to 30% off for UMass students. They just had it a few weeks ago, and I think they'll have it again. I don't know if they're going to have it again before the summer. It doesn't matter where you purchase something as long as you look professional. Borrow something. Students, I've heard of students who there's like one suit or one dressy dress on their floor, and it gets passed around to 10 different students in their dorm, right? So whatever, you do not need to go buy something for one interview. Just make sure you are wearing something that looks professional and reflects you in a good image. Make sure your screen background is neat and not cluttered. Some platforms don't have virtual backgrounds, so in that case, just make sure you have a really professional and quiet background. And then I mentioned dressing neat and clean. I also want to bring up this guy here. So this is Will Reeve. He was, his dad was actually the original Superman in the 70s, right? So he is a newscaster who this happened, this was, I actually pulled this slide like a year and a half ago. So this was the beginning of COVID. You can see he looks very professional. He's a newscaster being interviewed in his home, I think it was his home office or something. And then this newscaster on national television lifted up his leg and he wasn't wearing pants. And this goes back to, this is one of those funny things where this became like this meme didn't last long, but it lasted. But the whole point is dress 100%. So don't wear a shirt and sweatpants. Don't, you want to make sure you are dressed head to toe. What if your cat pushes open your door or the wind pushes open your door and you need to get up and shut the door? What if you drop your pen and it rolls and you have to go pick it up? So keep in mind, you will feel more confident and you will look more confident if you're dressed 100%, dressed head to toe, even if you are on Zoom. So just keep that in mind. That is important. So now that you know the tips for doing an interview, now there are some resources that we have to practice. So you can always schedule a mock interview with one of us in the Career Center. We are happy to do that. When you make an appointment on Handshake, you can just write in there that it is a mock practice that you want to practice interview. We do have some interview guidelines and resources on our website too. But if you do that, just bring in a copy of your resume and the job description or email it ahead of time so that we can prep some questions for you. We do mock interviews both for jobs, internships, med school, vet school, dental school, grad school. So we are happy to work with you and do practice interviews. I also really encourage you to do this with your friends and roommates. It'll feel kind of weird to do that with someone you know, but then think about it as, quid pro quo. You do this for them, they can do it, or if they help you, then you'll help them with the interview next too. So it goes both ways. I also want to mention Big Interview. Has anyone heard of Big Interview? No one has? Okay. This is an awesome software package that UMass has purchased. So it's free for students and staff and faculty. And what you do is just go to the umass.biginterview.com and it's all over our website. So you'll see it if you go to our interview page. And what it does is a software, so you log in with the UMass NetID and it has sample practice interviews that you can do. So you can actually record yourself kind of like YouTube videos and save them and play them back for yourself. It will flash questions up on the screen for you to practice that you can then record. It also has little, almost like video clips, like sample answers of how you might answer certain questions. It is a great way to prep for interviews. Whether you're prepping for interviews you might have in the future, or let's say you get an interview, someone calls you on Friday at 2 o'clock for an interview on Monday, you're not going to be able to get an appointment with us before that time. But you can practice over the weekend with Big Interview. And they also have question banks for grad school and med school and internships and research. So you can really focus on different industries, but it's a great resource that you can do from your own dorm room, apartment, wherever you might be. So definitely get tips for answering questions. Really, really great resource there. So, all right, I know I have thrown a lot of information at you all, but I'm sure there are still some questions. So what questions can I answer? All right, so if there are no questions, I would love to hear, oh, yes, Felicia.
I do have a question about salary. So
Yes.
when is the right time? And I think we touched on this point, but when is the right time to talk about salary? And when they ask you to give a range, how do you know it's too low or too high?
Great question. So when you are, usually the best time to ask about a salary is really not until you're kind of a finalist. So if you have like a second round interview, if you think you might be offered the job, hopefully the recruiter will bring it up before that. So ideally they should, often, excuse me, often in jobs, they will list a salary range or they will list a starting pay rate. If they don't though, you do, excuse me, you do kind of want to wait until that comes up with them. But you can ask, once you're there, if you're on your second interview, it is absolutely acceptable to ask for a range. I wouldn't ask for that set salary because the problem is too, if you ask for a set salary and they tell you, and then you later do some research and realize you should be getting $10,000 more, it's hard. You can still go back and negotiate that. But if they already told you it's a set amount and you've agreed to go further, it's kind of hard to push that a little bit more. So as far as figuring out the expected salary range, I'm going to put it in the chat, but they're also on our website. There are a couple websites like salary.com and glassdoor.com. And these are two great websites that if you type in, the one thing with these websites, like so many, is you will have to create an account, like you'll have to log in to get to a certain point. You can skip all the profile questions they ask you. Keep that in mind. So I use this all the time to work with students. And every time I log in, they ask me more questions, which is kind of annoying, but the benefits outweigh those annoyances. But keep in mind, you can skip all those profile questions. But what you can do in those, both salary.com and glassdoor.com, and then there are some other websites listed on our website too, is you type in the job title you're looking for. So like clinical research coordinator, and then the name of the company if you have it. So Boston Children's Hospital, or the city, Boston, Massachusetts. And it will tell you the median, it's like the range of pay that they have found for different jobs there. And some of that is put in by people who are in those jobs, and others are things they get off of the job descriptions. So there's sometimes a massive range. So you may see $40,000 to $70,000 for a job. So then once you do that, you have to say, okay, let's narrow this down a little bit. I know I will probably not be making $70,000. That's probably someone who's been working there for 5 to 7 years. At a certain point. So you want to probably start in like maybe a third in of that, I think of it. But I also check other websites. So if you find that on salary.com, then look on glassdoor.com too and compare the two. You will also find it's very different based on city. So you will make more in Boston most likely than you would make working in Northampton or Springfield. That's because the cost of living is so much higher in Boston. So, or New York City or certain places. So keep that in mind too. And again, that's another thing we can help with. If you're not sure, you can come in and say, what would an expected salary be? We can help you kind of navigate that too. So, great. So I would love to hear one or two things that you've learned today. Like what was something new you didn't know before about interviewing? You can put it in the chat if you don't want to talk out loud.
I learned how like professionalism is very important when it comes to appearance, and it is true like the first thing that a person sees, or like the first 30 seconds of your attitude and the way you like speak and the way you present yourself is important.
Absolutely, it's very important. And obviously still you want to advocate for yourself verbally, right? They still want to hear your answers. But it is really important to just put yourself in that best foot forward. Absolutely. Okay, so I just heard Melissa learned about Big Interview and the Big Interview website. Yep, great. I'm glad. Those are great resources I think so many people don't know about, and it is free, and UMass has purchased it. So you have to go in through that umass.biginterview.com link, because if you just go to biginterview.com, it won't let you in. But again, those links are all over our website. Anyone else learn something today? I will just end it with, oh, there's one more, hold on. Using the STAR method, yes. So that is a great, great thing to use. And also, I think for me, at least when I've interviewed in the past, it really helps me focus and make sure that I am not rambling a little bit, like to say, make sure, okay, I know the situation, the task, the action, and the result. And it really helps it go too, because sometimes it's kind of easy just to make it a 10-minute answer when it really only needs to be a couple minutes. So that's great. Yes. So I will just finish it up by saying you are all always welcome to, of course, meet with us. These are just some of the things that we can help with in our office. Interview practice is just one, but and some other things that may not even be on here. If you have questions, feel free to even send me an email too. This is my email address right here, and that career guide, as I mentioned, you're always welcome to come pick one up in our office. I could even put some down in your office if you want. Alicia, I could bring some down. But it's a great resource. It has information about sample resumes and cover letters and interviewing techniques and, you know, just a whole bunch of great stuff. So thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.